Hello everyone, Derek Johnson with Tatango.com. I'm here at Mobile World Congress 2019 in LA with Josh Wigginton from Interop Technologies. You've actually been there a long time.
Yes, I've been with Interop since 2007.
So 12 years?
Yeah, going 12, going on 13 years. Yeah, it was 2007. So yeah, just a little over 12 years.
Seems like a kind of theme in mobile messaging is people bounce around to a lot of different messaging companies. I was talking to you before.
Yeah.
Why have you stayed at a company so long?
Sure. So I'd say I started my career in telco with Interop. Prior to that, I was more worked for some software companies like Sony, worked for some hardware companies. So this was my first foray into telco. So there's a lot to learn. I had a lot of experience in IP, networks, computers, and things like that. But telco was a completely new technology for me. So it was a big, steep learning curve. And then just kind of worked my way up. They're a family-owned business. They've always taken care of me, and it's been a fun place to work.
And where is the company located?
So our headquarters in Fort Myers, Florida. So that's southwest coast of Florida.
It's a nice place.
Yeah. There's worse places in the world to be, And then we actually expanded into Dallas. Okay. So a lot of what we do is like hosted cloud-based services. So we needed the infrastructure, the technology, as well as the experience. So Dallas has been a huge kind of telco hub. You've got the Nortels and a lot of big, huge telco companies that have been in Dallas. So there's a tremendous amount of data centers, infrastructure, and talent there in that region. So we have offices in Dallas, Fort Myers, and as of, I may get this wrong, but 2014, 15 timeframe, we moved over into Dublin as well. So we kind of moving beyond just North America, started expanding into Europe.
I know it's a private company. How big is the company? Is there any kind of metrics you can share?
Sure.
Employees
we're about 100 employees.
Okay. Yeah. Very cool.
And we do all of our own development, engineering, operations. It's all in-house.
Okay. And for those that don't know what Interop Technologies is, let's try to explain it to my mother. What would she think? How could you explain it to her?
Sure. So we sell software to telcos, to mobile operators like AT&T, T-Mobile, Verizon, as well as big and small operators around the globe. And the software we sell is messaging, so text messaging. Our first product at Interop was an SMSC. Back then in 2001, it was actually one way. So you just sent a message. They didn't actually respond back.
And who is sending the message? Is this a brand or is this more like P2P type stuff?
Sure. So this was person to person back in I'm saying original SMSC technology.
Okay.
The first product that I worked on at Interop was actually what we call our CSC gateway, which is our common shortcode gateway. Which is, if you're familiar with you're very familiar, 5 and 6 digit short codes. That was the first product that I developed at Interop.
Okay. Why would a carrier need that product?
Sure. So it's, this was, again, back 2007. You had American Idol, text to win type campaigns. You had a lot of text to vote and different marketing campaigns. They needed a platform to be able to manage all those different brands.
Okay.
They primarily didn't work directly with the brands. They would work with content aggregators. So those aggregators would work with the brands. And then the aggregators would then have connectivity into the mobile operator's messaging infrastructure.
Okay.
So we developed a platform that we like to say aggregated the aggregators.
Okay. So you sit downstream of the aggregator between the carrier and the aggregator, essentially providing them kind of like an entry point to their systems, the wireless carriers.
Exactly. So they have messaging technology. A lot of times it was our SMSC, text messaging platform. And then we'd have our platform that sat on top of it, allow the carriers to review what were the campaign briefs. Hey, what's this campaign about? What's the opt-in process? What's the call to action? And then they would be able to approve it or reject it based upon whether or not it kind of met their requirements. Somewhere upwards of hundreds to thousands of these A to P campaigns on the platform. We have about about 30 mobile operators that are using this platform in North America.
So it really for them is like a build versus buy scenario.
Yeah.
And you're the buy.
Yeah, well, we actually did this as a SaaS offering, so a software as a service offering, where this was run within our data center. That way they didn't have to have the gear, the technology, the expertise to run it and manage it. We simply built the platform, it's run in our data centers, and then we connect to either our messaging infrastructure or if it's a different vendor, their existing messaging.
So it's like turnkey essentially. Like instead of them doing all the work, they could just go to you guys, connect, and then it's done.
Exactly.
To a certain extent. Yeah. I know there's a lot of integration no matter what happens. So now, that was kind of the first part of the company. Now, what is Interop?
Sure. So messaging technology has evolved.
Yep.
We obviously evolved our technology as well. We were one of the first, and I was honestly the internal champion for RCS, saying, "Hey, this whole SMS thing, it's going to be evolving. It's moving to this IP world."
When was that? When did you start?
2009, 2010.
Okay,
that was going way back. Yeah. So,
what did people think in your company?
There was actually a pretty big divide in whether or not it would actually ever happen.
Okay.
And you could say there's still somewhat of a divide in the industry, but there was you had kind of instant messaging, right? So you had going back in the spec, you had OMA Simple, and then you had OMA CPM. These like two different flavors of this IP-based messaging that was really trying to just compete with IM services like AIM, BlackBerry Messenger, those types of services. And then there really wasn't a good fit as to how messaging was going to evolve to this new platform. This was really when IMS was a concept, not really deployed. There wasn't a great use case for it. So we started making the investment into looking at, hey, how's it going to fit into our technology? How's it going to fit? How are operators going to use it? Back then, it was all about, subscribers are going to love it because now they have instant messaging type features. They have group chat. They have now rich images and file transfer and location share. So we invested in RCS. We were, if you remember, there was GSMA launched a branding called Join. It was the Join initiative, which was the basically RCSE, which was a version of RCS. The European operators adopted it. They were going to launch this kind of to compete with WhatsApp. WhatsApp is a brand, right?
Yes,
so in Twitter is a brand, Instagram's a brand, right? So they wanted to have this new brand called Join that would be the brand of this new version of messaging. And it was kind of the thought there was to combat the OTTs. WhatsApp had really slaughtered P2P messaging in a lot of countries like Europe, where they were still trying to charge, let's say 5 cents or 25 cents or euro cents per message. And you got these OTT providers that come in the scene and say, hey, it's free. When you're on Wi-Fi, it's free. Whenever you're on the operator's data, it uses such little data.
Because it's a message.
Yeah, it's a message, exactly. Yeah. And the carriers were still kind of holding on to this.
And that didn't happen in the United States. We kind of went unlimited or free. Therefore, you didn't need a WhatsApp or an over-the-top messaging. So almost the carriers kind of got a little lucky in the United States that they essentially reduced their revenue or kind of took that hit by going all unlimited. We're not going to charge anymore. But they also made sure that the over-the-top players weren't just going to destroy them like they've done in certain other countries. Where now some of these countries, they don't even use SMS at all. It's all over-the-top. Interesting.
Yeah, so I think U.S. got a little bit ahead of it because of as you're mentioning, the unlimited data plans, where messaging, voice, and data was all just kind of lumped into one fee, whether they be the kind of Metro PCSs of the world that kind of launched that unlimited, $40, pay plan for prepaid, and the carriers kind of had to adopt to that, kind of lock them in.
There's a lot of competition too, because how many carriers do we have, wireless carriers like T-Mobile, in the United States? Is it 80 or something?
It's huge. Yeah. So a lot
Most
of people
don't know that.
A lot of people don't know that unless you're in a rural community in in North Carolina or South Carolina, or maybe you're in Alaska or something where but you have tremendous amount of carriers. A lot of our carriers that look towards a hosted or a managed service offering are the smaller, what you call the tier 2, tier 3 operators. So they're not the AT&T, the T-Mobiles, the Sprints, or Verizons, but they're the sub 1 million sub operator.
Interesting.
Yeah, there's tons of them out there.
And that's kind of what happened. Because there's so much competition, there's so much innovation when there's a ton of We were talking, I think it was Eddie, and he was talking about China has 3 carriers, and that's like all. Maybe that's right or wrong. But
I think they started opening up to some MVNOs, so some more competition's going to come in.
But like we have 80 plus or whatever carriers and just and people with less than even 1 million subs. But they're innovating, they're doing the free product, and then that forces the other carriers to adjust.
Yeah.
So it's been an interesting kind of shift, compared to some of the other places in the world.
And I think Europe was a little bit disadvantaged in that, they had large fees, let's say, US, 350 million subs or whatever it is. Europe, me driving from, Florida to Georgia, I could go to 3 different countries if I'm in Europe, right? Europe. And there's data roaming, there's all kinds of other charges and huge termination fees that operators are trying to collect. So that made it very expensive for subscribers and mobile operators to do some of this, the mobile messaging.
So they made a little bit of money, but they also created essentially OTT apps.
Yeah.
Now they're kind of having to go back and retrench, and RCS is the next kind of thing for them to maybe get a little piece of the messaging back.
Yeah, you talk to some operators, and they're not looking to revitalize, or they're not really hopeful that you're going to get this P2P. Volume back. Person-to-person messaging is not really going to come back. They figure that's going to stay with the WhatsApps. Now, granted, WhatsApp can screw it up. I mean, they can basically, if they start inserting ads, if there's the link to Facebook and data privacy, security. I mean, there's some fear and uncertainty there, and there's also some potential. Are they a telco provider? Are they providing a service that requires things like lawful intercept? Some of those things are still yet to be seen. There was
and lawful intercept is essentially the police or the court can go into the message, unencrypt it, see what it is. But there's also a lot of countries that the I guess citizens don't want that. So there's all these. But Facebook, because they're not a telco yet, or they haven't been classified as that, they don't have to do that, but AT&T has to.
Correct.
Which means they're not like end-to-end encrypted, which in the United States I think most people are okay with. But you go to some other countries where the government wants to see your messages, that's a little more scary for them. So
and I think that when that happens, if there are, I don't want to say bad actors, but they're going to find other ways. They're going to move to a Telegram, or they're going to move to another service that is going to provide them that end-to-end encryption. But Joe consumer that just uses a phone, I mean, they just want it to work. Being honest, I don't really care if if anybody's listening to my message, they can see all the little memes or little things I send back and forth with my wife and my kids. You live in the United States, though.
Like it's a much safer culture. Some of these countries, end-to-end encryption is massively, a safety issue for them. But it depends on who is, providing that messaging infrastructure. It's an interesting kind of thing. And the encryption thing always gets everybody because it's encrypted, but it's not end-to-end encrypted. And that's where people get confused, I think, on the encryption debate for messaging.
Yeah, the transport is encrypted so that you're in a coffee shop and that's going to go across encrypted. So it couldn't be someone sniffing in and trying to listen into your conversations that you're texting. But once it gets beyond that to the operator's network, which is a private and a trusted network, that is an unencrypted message.
And if they get a court order, lawfully intercept, going into the message.
And it's dependent upon interpretation as well. I know that some operators, even in North America, feel that messaging is not a service that requires live lawful intercept. Now, you can have, let's say, what basically law enforcement or courts do what is called subpoena requests, where they're requesting information. The carrier has to provide whatever information they have. In some cases, that's simply, more what you call records, CDRs, call records. They send a message to and from this date and this time, but live lawful intercept. That can happen on voice, that can happen on data channels, but depending on the operator and I'm trying to remember there's a specific classification of service, and messaging is like an information service versus a telco type service. So But you go to other countries, and it's definitely a hard, fast requirement that it needs to be accessible by law enforcement for messaging. And honestly, they're not to jump down to the specs, but there are some gaps with RCS to where file transfer, as an example, there's no solution today to be able to. So if I'm sending you a message, and again, I apologize, this is going to get way down into the geeky. But basically that's a SIP session we set up. There's MSRP, which is what's used to send the message, but then there's a separate interface, which is HTTP, which is basically like MMS more or less, where you post with a file and the other person retrieves it. Well, in the IMS standard, this whole HTTP is outside of the signaling and the MSRP sessions, so there's no defined interface for actually retrieving that file, or basically being able to see what I can see that you sent a link to a file, but what the contents of that file was, I can't actually see it.
That's not interesting.
But I mean, we'll have to define a spec and a standard around it. The problems will be solved, but there's no standards-based way of doing it yet.
You were saying something interesting. It seems like maybe last Mobile World Congress, it was all about the consumers are going to love this. It's P2P, for maybe other countries other than the United States. It seems like now the people we're interviewing, they're kind of like, maybe some places have lost the war on the P2P RCS. They're focused now on providing kind of the application to person, so business messaging to the consumer. Does it feel like maybe in some places it's more about the A2P than the P2P on the RCS stuff? I
would say definitely. I mean, the P2P is going to be a good experience, and I think if you talk to Google, who's has kind of not had the iMessage experience on Android. It's been limited in their capabilities of what they can do via chat. So, the P2P experience with Android messages, getting that across on all these different OEMs and having Samsung support it and being interoperable between the two different clients, that's going to be a huge win for them, because now I've got the instant messaging, the one-to-one chat, group chat, rich file transfer, location. I've got that in my messaging, which is going to be an improvement to where people... I think they did a survey that if some of the reasons people stick to an iPhone is they like the iMessage experience.
I love it.
Yeah, right? So they don't have that on an Android today. I mean, they'd have to go to an OTT.
But this would
client.
be in countries that haven't maybe moved 100% off to WhatsApp.
Exactly.
So it's kind of that middle ground.
Yeah, but when you talk to the carriers, they can't charge more for that. They're not going to be able to monetize. Even North America, right? They're not going to make more money off of it.
They're not going to charge the consumer more to receive an RCS message.
Correct.
So now the carriers and everybody are kind of focused on the business and saying the business is the one that's going to pay for this service, and it's going to flow down to us, Tatango. It's going to flow down to the aggregators, then flow down to the carrier.
Exactly. And that was, going back to the previous in the conversation, I was talking about RCS Join, and the reason that never went anywhere, there was never a business case. There was never a business case for carriers to launch it. And A2P has brought in that business case that is actually can and will be profitable. I think the GSMA and their messaging labs that they're doing has brought a great awareness to the brands and bringing them into the ecosystem to show some of the use cases, the higher click-through rates and read rates and redemptions and everything, and what can be done with RCS is really driving adoption of RCS globally. And some operators are still, when you talk to them, they don't want to invest. There's two different ways to invest. One is, build it and they will come, kind of deploy the service, get penetration, bring all the brands. When it starts making money, we're in this together, more of the revenue share model, because they still don't want to invest CapEx. So they still don't want to buy a platform. They want to either launch it from my cloud, from a different cloud, and then look at what the revenue looks like in years 3, 4, and 5 as all these campaigns and brands are starting to use RCS.
Because I've heard from a few carriers, maybe smaller carriers, that somebody there has to make the decision to build it or to pay for it, and no one wants to really be the one that calls this wrong. So is that kind of, and that's maybe why they're looking for alternatives to kind of pay for it, or hybrid models. Like, no one wants to be at the end of the day, because it's still, we've heard in the interviews we've been doing, this whole thing can still be destroyed. Like we as an industry still can ruin this thing.
Yes.
So it's not a foregone conclusion that it's going to happen.
Yeah.
So is that somewhat kind of the carriers are just waiting till almost the last moment, to really put their necks, somebody within the carriers to put their necks out there?
Yeah, and I think that's definitely true, and especially in markets where we've been there, we've done that. You know what I mean? Or let's say we already invested in RCS,
like 5 years
ago and never went anywhere. What's different about it now? Okay, that's great. Let's prove it first. So that's really been the case with talking to most mobile operators. Is they want to start out small. They want to mitigate as much risk as they can. They want to offset any type of real capex or any real spend till later. And they're not sure. You know what I mean? They're great at running core networks. They're not great. You start talking about, okay, and then you can develop these chatbots and start monetizing them and working with brands and SMBs, and they don't have the capacity to do that.
They never even worked with a brand.
Exactly.
It's all consumer.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly. And now this is a business messaging service versus a consumer messaging service, or I'm great at building out, eNode Bs and spectrums and data networks, having, carrier grade, fault tolerant systems, but, selling to businesses and enterprises and bringing innovative use cases. We haven't excelled at that in the past, or I'd say the telcos themselves haven't. But there are some. I mean, there's definitely some that have. I mean, there's some that are pioneering and leading the way, that are very innovative, that want to, what I say, climb the stack. So they've got their own platform. They want to work directly with brands, especially the larger brands, and bring these use cases to market.
Because they're looking for additional revenue sources, or selling upstream. If we power all the phones in this business, why don't we also power their SMS, their marketing, their communication?
And a lot of times these are the group operators that also own media companies, you know what I mean, that also own, big internet companies and brands, have their own consumer brand that they've kind of built themselves. They're not just your traditional
dumb pipe.
Exactly.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So we totally skipped this question.
Sure.
What is your position at the company? You've been doing it for 12 years. You started pretty green, obviously mobile.
Yeah.
What's your position now? Kind of what does it look like? What do you do on a day-to-day basis?
Sure. So I'm VP of Product Management, so I run the Product Management group. We have, basically in Product Management, you have product managers that are going to define the features, the functionality, the specifications for each product, and define the roadmap, the vision, the marketing, everything for the product. They're the CEO, if you will, of a given product. So I have a group of product managers that are then over subsequent products, or portfolios of products. So on a daily basis, as of late, there's been so much RCS activity. I've kind of been the leading RCS evangelist around the globe. So doing a lot of traveling, going to different industry events, or there's been a lot of what you call tenders, RFPs, where big operators put together all the specifications. You have to go back and fill out all your requirements, define all the pricing and all the diagrams, and answer all the questions. Then you have to go sit in a room of 15, 20 people and defend your product, right?
Yeah.
So
because you're one of many things the carriers can add that year.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
Or remove.
Yeah. So there's been a lot of RFP defense, so traveling different operators.
Internationally, domestic?
Actually internationally. So ton of activity in Europe.
Cool.
Ton of mobile operators in Europe, and and they're countrywide, which is great because I love seeing where like a specific country where they're working together. So all the operators are working together, saying, when are we going to launch? What do we have common requirements? Working with the regulatory bodies, understanding things like lawful intercept. Trying to get ahead of the game of solving the problems on interconnect and settlement and roaming and how all those things will work. But the biggest thing is just working together for a national launch. Because if you think about service...
Would this be over national as like over the whole Europe, or just like each individual country?
Over the country.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, that's the biggest, because... I don't have the statistics, but majority of messaging, let's use a certain, let's say in Germany, most Germans are going to be messaging other Germans. I mean, there will be, international messaging. For the most part, if you can get Germany launched and live, I mean, there's a large percentage of your subscribers that now have RCS capabilities.
Does it force other countries? Like I know here, U.S., I bet we don't look to either country up or down, of what we would need to do. If Germany launches RCS, is it like the surrounding countries are like, oh, we got to get our stuff together? Do you see a lot of like following in these other countries that maybe are smaller but closer to each other?
Yeah, definitely. I would say that within Western Europe, you have a lot of mobile operators that are on the same page, launching together, and that's helpful that you have groups. So you have like Vodafone's, the Telefonica, the Deutsche Telekom, T-Mobile groups, where they have properties in each of those countries. Okay. So as they're launching, they're working together and they're saying, trying to replicate a model that they can do in other countries as well.
So they're not. The carriers you just mentioned, they have presence in many different countries, so they're kind of using their experience. Where in the United States, AT&T is primarily, U.S. So that they're going to do it once, and it's going to kind of be done. They're not going to learn from their experience and translate it to different countries. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, if you're an operator, let's say like Orange, you're spread across the globe, or Telefonica. You know what I mean, and just being able to do more of a global rollout, and then having to work in the different regions with the different operators, and then different legal requirements in those countries, different use cases make sense and don't make sense, different handset penetration. So you have to have a different strategy. But I think you're learning on each of the countries that you're rolling out.
So do you think from like an Interop standpoint, sales standpoint, is it essentially being sold as like a moneymaker for carriers now with the A2P? Because the P2P, it's kind of like, there's a lot of other options out there for P2P, and it's kind of becoming the same, on WhatsApp. Like, you have all the features and functionality you need most of the time, or iMessage. Yeah. Is that how you're selling it? Is like, this could be a huge, revenue line for you guys, because brands are going to want to pay, and they're not going to do it on WhatsApp, or, it's just too much distributed. Like, they're going to be on your network. Do they see it as like a revenue line item? Like, is that the North Star for them?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
So there's two things. One is they need to really protect the existing revenue, because right now the only business messaging that exists, granted WhatsApp and those guys they're stepping into it, right? And the Vibers of the world. But today, when you look at A2P business messaging, carriers own that market. We could have said this 10 years ago about P2P messaging. Yeah. Where did it go, right? Yeah. So they need to do something to protect that, because it will move to rich communications. The brands are going to want not just 160 characters with a link. They're going to want this new rich experience, and if it's not provided by the operator and RCS, then they'll move to WhatsApp, to Viber, to Apple Business Chat. They'll move to a different channel that will give them this experience, because it is a richer, more engaging conversational experience. Whether it's in the native messaging inbox or the OTT, users are in messaging. They're not picking up the phone and wanting to call for customer care and support. They want to jump out, and right now it's probably via web. They want to do web-based chat. But if it's there in the inbox, or there in WhatsApp, or wherever they can reach it, that is where the eyeballs are. That is where consumers have gone to messaging applications.
So it's almost like they're a little fearful they've lost maybe the P2P, and they're looking at A2P currently makes them money.
Yeah, large amounts of money.
Large amount. And they're saying you either can improve on it and maybe make more money, become part of the ecosystem, be more value added, or you could just lose the A2P and it's going to go over to another service. So it's a little bit fear-based almost, but it's real. Like it could happen.
It definitely could, and but we're not selling on the fear factor, because it'll take a while to get there, I think, and there's probably use cases that it doesn't make sense to do over WhatsApp, right? Yeah. It doesn't make sense to do over Facebook Messenger from a brand standpoint, or certain, let's say 2FA. You talk to the brands, they're like, I might be able to reach them via WhatsApp, I might be able to get them via Messenger, but I know I can get them via SMS, right? It's the known, everybody's got SMS. If RCS becomes that, then that'll be huge for mobile operators.
But things happen quickly. Like people didn't even think that like WhatsApp would become
who's this company, right?
We got years, and then it just like took off. Yeah. So it is kind of one of those things the carriers definitely, because I think the tipping point happens and there's no returning. Yeah. So it is kind of like but that's interesting that everybody we've talked to recently has been, the P2P is kind of like, it's the A2P. Everybody needs to focus their eyes and attention on the A2P. You can't lose this. Yeah. And then A2P obviously comes with P2P as well.
Yeah, and the carriers, some carriers we talk to are thinking that that RCS will become really the business messaging channel, meaning like they don't even envision P2P being used. Let's say in very WhatsApp centric markets where 95+% of users all use WhatsApp.
Just giving up on P2P.
Yeah, they have, but if the handset supports RCS, then the carrier can, let's say, kick off a slight campaign to simply say, hey, look what you can do, customer care, customer service. You can do top-ups, you can check on your bill via this messaging chatbot. And then from that start to launch more brands and get more services using that. So the consumers knows that I go to my carrier's messaging for enterprise, important business messaging, and the WhatsApp's fun for with my friends and my family. I'm sending them WhatsApp. And that's in mostly European markets where they don't have P2P. Yep. US, I think it's completely different. I think you still have a lot of consumers using the native messaging experience.
Whether it's iMessage or like most consumers don't know the difference.
Yeah.
That's interesting you mentioned that too. We were in South America for a little bit, and they do see SMS as just 2FA, bank alerts, important stuff.
Yeah.
And then WhatsApp is their personal stuff. So it's almost been kind of split.
Segregated. Yeah.
That's interesting. Carriers, they obviously, they're going to have to cannibalize their existing A2P business with, this RCS. But
transition it.
Yeah, transition. You're much more tactile than I am. How much more are carriers going to make, do you think, by, offering RCS over SMS? Like, is this a huge opportunity for them, or is this just making sure they don't lose the existing business?
Yeah. I think that so some of that's still TBD, right? Mm-hmm. It all depends on, like you said earlier, carriers still have the opportunity to mess this up, right? Yep. If they think they're going to get a dollar per message or €1 per message, they're fooling themselves, right? Where most markets you're getting, let's say, 1, 2, 4, 7 euro cents a message.
So comparable to SMS. It's like it's on the same. Like you can't 100x your SMS cost. Now, we saw that kind of with like MMS. They thought, this is an amazing thing. We can add an image. Let's charge a lot. And a lot of people didn't use it. Yeah. Since it's come down, that could happen, you think, if they get greedy almost.
Yeah, if they do get greedy, there could be issues. The other thing would be, let's say two-factor authentication. Very simple, very straightforward. Is it going to be 10 times better? I can see my brand there when I get the 2FA. Not really. I just want that 5 or 6 digit code to put it in the computer. Yeah. So if you charge the same for 2FA as you do today for SMS on RCS, that's great because that's a tremendous amount of volume that you're now moving over. It is IP based, so some carriers it could be a cost savings SS7 versus IP based.
Makes sense, yeah.
But then let's say you're sending rich cards and carousels and videos. That can get a premium above obviously what you're getting today.
It's moving your existing revenue, keeping it the same for some messages like 2FA type stuff, but then adding the additional revenue on these kind of more, adding a card, adding rich messaging, files, whatever it is. That's what Nick Lane from Mobile Squared, who's talking about this morning, is I think an RCS message will essentially be the same cost as an SMS, the basic 160, 300, whatever characters it is. And then you essentially allow the brand to build on top of that and just add more money, to the pot, by adding verification, whatever it is that, is interesting for that brand.
Yeah, and I think there will be other opportunities for carriers to monetize this ecosystem or RCS. Not selling carrier data, hopefully not using it to pump ads down into messaging, but more things, let's say you do have a chatbot directory and you do have, you're searching for, hey, I'm looking to order a pizza. Maybe the operator could start to monetize, the results as far as whether or not Pizza Hut or Domino's or Papa John's is at the top. Some of those things could be ways for carriers to monetize.
Interesting. They're not even messaging. It's just where you appear in the messaging.
Yeah.
Interesting. So there's a ton of different revenue models that 100% do not exist with SMS currently. So a bunch of different things.
There's going to be brand verification and authority, so brands are going to have to pay to be verified to make sure they get the little check mark and how is a carrier part of that ecosystem because it's going across their platform. And then, who knows, I think once you get this in the hands of some really once it's deployed, subscribers are there, whether or not, again, they're using it for P2P or just the handsets are there. Once you get this in the hands of some creative people, I think you're going to see some really cool stuff.
That's super interesting.
Yeah.
Interview we did a couple back said the exact same thing. We're more the platform. You put the creative people, give them the tools, and you never know where it's going to go. And some of the stuff we can't even think about right now.
Yeah.
That's really cool. What's next? I know we got to let you go here soon. What's next for Interop Technologies? The next year, what's next for you? What are you excited about?
Sure. I'm excited about, Interop growing as a company. I mean, we're getting a tremendous amount of opportunities. We have a ton of, we have quite a few large channel partners that are going out and reselling our technologies as well, giving us reach in areas where we don't have boots on the ground. So that'll help us a lot from a company standpoint and getting our technology out there. And then, we're excited about just this stuff being live. You know what I mean? We've now signed 20 different mobile operators with RCS. Wow. So we're going to be busy. Yeah. So it's taking making this real. Getting it deployed, getting scale on the platforms. Moving some of these carriers that are on proof of concepts or maybe only have hundreds of a couple thousand users, getting the platform to scale. There's still a lot of problems that need to be solved in the ecosystem. Getting everybody connected on the intercarrier, getting someone in the U.S. can send a message to someone in Europe, and all those things work, and it all works. And we've had there's a ton of different versions of RCS out in the wild. You talk to Europe, and some of the operators like Vodafone has UP 1.0, UP 2.0, UP 2.2. You've got different ways of doing discovery and capabilities exchange between devices, and those cause a lot of unique opportunities and problems to be solved. So I'd say we're not there yet, but I think we're solving some of those problems. You have a lot of, with VoLTE and RCS being deployed on the same network with an Android device running Google and then Samsung. There's a lot of complexities that need to be solved in the industry. We're working to solve those, working to interconnect the different mobile operators together. And when you look back at SMS, when it experienced that hockey stick growth, it was when the carriers interconnected. Yeah. When in North America, when we have all the carriers launched and with RCS, but they're not interconnected. Once they truly get interconnected, that's when we're going to see an explosion of RCS.
Like the tipping point.
The tipping point, the inflection point of RCS, and then getting those different islands connected in the major, let's say Europe, Asia, North America, getting the Canada, Mexico, getting everybody interconnected, there is really going to become a valuable service.
The last interview I did with you, I'm pretty sure I asked you, is this the year of RCS? And I don't know what you said.
I said yes, it was.
Okay.
Yeah.
I bet you looked at the video, you're like, Derek's going to bring this up. Was that last year, 2018, maybe?
It was MWC.
Okay.
I think it was MWC. Yeah.
Do you want to revise your statement?
No, I don't. Is it the year that was 2019 the year that we got to 1 billion users? Yep. No, it wasn't. But it's a year that, personally, Interop, we got 20 signed carriers on it, right?
Feels like committed. Like people are, it's shifting.
It is shifting. You got all the tier ones in North America that have RCS launched. Now, 2020, just from the amount of activity we have, is going to be moving to actually moving beyond RFP, moving beyond POC, getting real deployment, right? This is the actualization or the realization of getting it out, getting it deployed, getting the brand. We now have majority of all the aggregators connected to our MAP platform that are sending chatbots. We have chatbot directory with real live campaigns running on devices. It's exciting to us that this is becoming real. Now, I think that, charging and monetization, those will be things that I think we see in 2020, where carriers actually starting to generate revenue on RCS, and the ecosystem as a whole starting to generate revenue on RCS as those campaigns start coming on board. There's still charging issues that need to be solved, or how do I pay for it? Who gets paid? What's the model? Those things still need to be worked out in certain countries and regions. Verification, how do I verify this is indeed Nike versus not Nike versus Burger King or whatever the brand is. There's some verification authorities or platforms that need to be developed. either globally, nationally, or handled at the individual operator level. So I think those problems are going to be solved. I think the interconnect issue is going to be solved. North America, I think you'll see all the tier 1 operators interconnected. So if I have a Samsung device and an Android, Google, client device on any carrier, that RCS is working.
Yeah.
We're working with the major intercarrier providers with our hub to make sure all that interconnect and messaging flows between all the different clouds or implementations of RCS.
You got a big couple of years in front of you.
Yeah, it's gonna be a very busy year. Just getting those 20 carriers launched and live, and then working through some of the interconnect and interoperability challenges.
Wow. Yeah. All right. Well, I bet I'll see you at the next Mobile World Congress.
Absolutely.
Okay. Again, this is Josh from Interop Technologies. My name is Derek Johnson with Tatango.com. We are here at Mobile World Congress 2019 in LA. Again, thanks everyone for tuning in.